The SEAL base radar in Okinawa thrummed with a low electric hum. Blips flickered across screens, every satellite ping and intercepted signal passing through Patricia Quinn's hands with surgical precision. Patterns emerged, gaps, timing windows, enemy movements no one else saw. A twitch in her eye, a clenched jaw, heartbeat syncing with the pulses on the display. Hamilton Blackwood strode in. "Patricia, your obsession won't replace action. Keep up or stand aside." Teammates averted their eyes. She barely noticed the heat of the room, the smell of burnt coffee. Then, drones approaching Taiwan. "They'll strike the fleet in 15 minutes. Their approach isn't in protocol." Blackwood dismissed her. Without hesitation, Patricia rerouted automated defenses, intercepted enemy comms, and created a silent disruption. The attack faltered. No credit, only survival. The team looked at her differently, finally seeing the invisible genius. The real battle was just beginning.
The radar screens inside the clandestine SEAL Tactical Operations Center in Okinawa emitted a low, persistent hum. The fluorescent overheads cast a sterile glow across the room, reflecting off rows of consoles covered in encrypted feeds, cascading green code, and digital topographies of contested maritime zones. Patricia Quinn, 44, veteran SEAL and tactical intelligence specialist, sat upright, her spine rigid, eyes scanning the scrolling anomalies with surgical precision. A barely perceptible twitch ran along her right eyelid, microtic born from exhaustion and the relentless focus demanded by the incoming SIGINT. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, fingers flexing, poised to strike as new data streams flickered across the monitors. Patterns emerged where others saw noise. Minute variations in radio traffic, subtle deviations in troop vectors, algorithmic inconsistencies in drone flight paths. Patricia identified them instantly, the edges of her vision catching frequencies that blurred into the static for anyone else. Her breathing was shallow but controlled, a deliberate rhythm that anchored her cognition while the room seemed to pulse around her. She recognized the same sequences she had cataloged in previous missions, the enemy's preparatory scans, the digital signatures of autonomous targeting protocols. Captain Hamilton Blackwood, 58, approached her console. His boots clicked against the floor with the hollow authority of rank untempered by situational awareness. His eyes skimmed the monitors without comprehension, lips pressed in a thin, dismissive line. Leaning over, he exhaled sharply, the leather of his chair squeaking behind him. "Patricia," he said, voice loud, precise, intended to assert control. "Your obsession with details never replaces kinetic force. Keep up or stay out of the way." The operators nearby held their gaze fixed on their own screens, shoulders rigid. One hand hovered over a mouse, the other clenching a pen, knuckles whitening with unconscious tension. The room did not respond, but the air seemed to compress around Patricia. Each inhale a calculated measure against the simmering frustration coiling in her chest. The edge of her jaw flexed involuntarily. She bit the inside of her cheek. Every alert she had raised over the past month, every flagged vulnerability had been dismissed as paranoia or excess caution. Her intellect, honed through decades of field operations and cyberkinetic integration, was invisible here. A sudden shift in the radar feed drew her full attention. Amber lights blinked insistently across the array. A swarm of drones, unidentified, high velocity, and executing precise approach vectors breached the radar horizon. Patricia's eyes narrowed. She traced the data to the enemy's electronic warfare signature, the patterns unmistakable. Decapitation strike. The tactical implications unfolded in her mind in milliseconds. Strike timing, weapon lethality, interception probabilities, collateral damage vectors. "They are going to strike the Strait Fleet in less than 15 minutes, she murmured, voice steady, almost detached. Fingers danced across her keyboard, executing rapid keystrokes to intercept telemetry. Her breath hitched slightly as she calculated the trajectories, her eyes reflecting lines of code overlaid on digital maps. The vectors they are using aren't in our standard defense protocols. Blackwood's eyes rolled. He adjusted his collar, dismissive. Stand down, Quinn. It's just ghost signals on the radar. You're being paranoid. Patricia's pulse remained measured, but the subtle clenching of her fists betrayed the intensity behind her calm exterior. Without hesitation, she bypassed the captain's authorization, routing her access through a back door she had constructed weeks prior. Her mind mapped the enemy's strike sequence in real time, threading through the complex interplay of targeting systems, automated defense loops, and decoy coordinates. In a precise series of commands, she redirected the fleet's phalanx CIWS units, feeding the drones a false high-value signature. The swarm veered, banking hard, and plunged into open water. 3 minutes later, the radar was quiet. The room exhaled collectively, though no words were spoken. Operators leaned back, blinking as if surfacing from a sudden immersion. Patricia allowed herself a brief pause, hands hovering over the console. The red, encrypted command phone on Blackwood's desk began to ring, slicing through the momentary relief. Blackwood's hand gripped the red, encrypted receiver, the knuckles pale under the fluorescent glare. As he lifted the earpiece to his ear, his spine locked into rigid alignment, shoulders squared, every line of his posture broadcasting authority. The voice of the Pacific Fleet Admiral cut through the static, crisp, and authoritative. Blackwood's lips parted in a practiced smile before a word was even spoken, teeth barely visible. His eyes flicked toward the operators, scanning for affirmation. Yet there was no interruption, no acknowledgement of the true source behind the neutralized threat. He spoke with measured cadence, carefully selecting each phrase. The drone swarm was neutralized through swift command execution and the coordinated effort of my team, he stated, emphasizing the collective, giving no hint of Patricia's unilateral intervention. His tone conveyed precision, competence, and calm decisiveness, every syllable sharpened to reinforce the narrative he was constructing. He paused briefly after outlining the so-called tactical maneuvers, fingers lightly tapping the console, then continued detailing theoretical contingencies and risk mitigations, fully aware of the listening admiral's weighty scrutiny. Across the room, Patricia remained motionless. Her hands gripped the edge of her workstation, knuckles whitening as the pressure transmitted up her forearms. Her eyes were fixed on the scrolling telemetry logs. Yet her vision filtered through the static of the moment, honing in on minute anomalies, the slight drift in drone approach vectors, the residual electromagnetic interference, the uncorrected targeting loops. A subtle exhale escaped her lips, but the shoulders remained squared, rigid, trained into a posture of calm control. Not a single operator corrected Blackwood. The chain of command was visually intact, unbroken. She did not speak. She did not raise her voice. Instead, Patricia opened a heavily encrypted partition on her localized drive, her fingers moving with deliberate, almost ritualistic precision. Each keystroke entered the protected environment, access protocols layered beneath multi-factor encryption. She began logging the raw drone engagement data, frequency shifts in milliseconds, evasive maneuvers extracted from telemetry, algorithmic response delays, and most critically, the gaps in the defensive perimeter left unaddressed by Blackwood's operational directives. Each entry was meticulous, time-stamped, geolocated, and verified against multiple sensor feeds. This became her shadow dossier. She ran comparative matrices overlaying enemy command signatures against observed behaviors during the aborted strike. From the patterns, she deduced operational psychology. The commanders would perceive failure as unacceptable, recalibrate their approach, and shift from autonomous drone strikes to kinetic ground operations. Her gaze flicked repeatedly between the monitors, noting the subtle discrepancies in drone alignment, as if reading the enemy's intent in the digital residue they had left behind. Patricia methodically plotted contingency scenarios, layering topographic data with enemy movement vectors, calculating choke points and bottlenecks with millimeter accuracy. Each variable altitude profiles comes frequencies. Approach angles was cross-referenced against Blackwood's predictable decision-making framework. She knew, with unerring certainty, which predictable errors he would replicate under stress. Her calculations did not falter. Her mind traced the battlefield 10 moves ahead, a lattice of potential outcomes constrained by both enemy patterns and friendly command rigidity. Late into the night, the base had surrendered to silence. Servers hummed, cooling fans whispered through the air ducts, and the faint click of keystrokes echoed in the empty operational corridors. Patricia's eyes remained locked on the monitors, pupils dilated, face illuminated by the soft green glow of encrypted data streams. A new signal appeared, highly encrypted, bouncing off a dark satellite over the Philippine Sea. Her fingers paused mid-air. The packet contained indicators of a far larger, coordinated strike. The patterns confirmed her calculations. The aborted drone engagement was a precursor, a probe designed to measure response times and extract weaknesses. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly, a quiet contraction of muscle, eyes narrowing as her mind traced the operational consequences. She leaned forward, shoulders tense but controlled, and began overlaying the new transmission on her shadow dossier, integrating every data point, every digital footprint, into her evolving predictive matrix. Each entry sharpened her situational awareness. Each anomaly fed the mental model of the impending kinetic operation. Her chest rose and fell in measured cadence, restrained, as though synchronizing with the calculated pulse of the impending conflict. The room around her existed only as peripheral motion, the hum of air conditioning, the occasional tap of a mouse elsewhere, none of it interrupting the focused, quiet storm behind Patricia Quinn's eyes. The briefing room was quiet except for the subtle whir of cooling fans and the occasional hum of a projector. Patricia Quinn stood before the holographic topographic map of the forward operating base perched on the remote coastal ridge near Taiwan. Her finger traced the contours of a narrow valley, the ridgelines etched in precise relief. She highlighted the area in red, the color stark against the muted green and gray of the digital terrain. Her eyes scanned the patrol routes she had overlaid, each line a prediction of enemy positioning, kill zones, and likely fields of fire. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she spoke, voice measured and calm, detailing that the failed drone strike had been nothing more than a probe, a calculated reconnaissance to gauge response times. Blackwood paced along the length of the room, boots clicking against the laminate flooring. His hand brushed the edge of the projection console, then flexed into a loose fist before he shook his head, dismissing her analysis with a subtle exhale. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly in a tight, self-assured smirk. He gestured toward the recon team, pointing at the men already donning tactical vests and helmets, their fingers adjusting straps and weapons with habitual precision. "We project strength, Quinn," he said, voice firm and unyielding. "We don't cower from mathematical probabilities. The patrol goes out as scheduled." His jaw moved rhythmically, a slight tick in his left cheek as he reinforced his authority without challenge. Patricia's chest rose in measured rhythm. She did not argue. Her hand hovered over her personal datapad, fingers flexing in near imperceptible micro-adjustments. As the team prepared, she silently downloaded localized terrain maps and tactical communications frequencies, layering them into her secure partition. Her pupils narrowed, tracking each SEAL's actions, the adjustment of gloves, the click of magazine retention catches, the tilt of helmets over radios. A shallow exhale escaped her as she calculated extraction contingencies, insertion points, and blind spots along the valley corridor. 2 hours later, the operations center was quiet, lulled into routine. Monitors displayed static patrol check-ins, minor frequency pings confirming positions and status. Blackwood reclined in his leather chair, coffee in hand, gaze sweeping the console as if every indicator affirmed his command judgment. He sipped deliberately, tilting the cup just so, the corners of his eyes crinkling in satisfaction, unaware of the anomalies Patricia had quietly catalogued. Then the primary radio channel erupted. Static shattered the hum of the room, a series of loud, irregular bursts that cut through the controlled environment. The sharp crack of heavy machine gun fire followed almost instantly, reverberating through the frequency. A voice pierced the interference, ragged and urgent, shouting for immediate medevac. Patricia's eyes narrowed, pupils contracting as she tracked the disrupted telemetry streams. Her fingers hovered above her datapad, flexing in precise anticipation, ready to overlay terrain with the incoming distress signals. The muscle along her jaw tightened subtly, the quiet expression of awareness that she alone had mapped every potential outcome. Every operator's gaze flicked toward the projection, but no one moved to correct or intervene. Blackwood remained frozen mid-sip, eyes narrowing as the fragmented communications continued, the faint pulse of adrenaline visible in the slight tremor of his hand on the armrest. Patricia's chest expanded in controlled, deliberate breaths. She adjusted the datapad, overlaying the insurgent movement vectors with the projected positions of the SEAL recon element. Her lips parted slightly as she began issuing silent calculations, every micro-adjustment feeding the contingency she had already prepared for this exact eventuality. The quiet of the room contrasted with the chaos emerging over the radio, a stark tension visible only in micro-expressions, clenched fists, subtle eye ticks, and the rigid line of Patricia's shoulders as she absorbed the situation, preparing to act. The comms crackled violently, fragments of words interspersed with the mechanical thud of incoming mortar rounds. "Contact! We are taking heavy fire from multiple elevated positions." The recon team leader's voice broke through the static, tight and ragged, each syllable sharp against the relentless background noise. The data stream jittered, telemetry spikes marking impacts, radio frequencies scrambled by enemy electronic jammers. Blackwood's chair scraped across the floor as he sprang to his feet, a sharp movement that sent his half-sipped coffee sloshing across the tactical map. The dark liquid traced irregular patterns over printed terrain schematics, unnoticed by him in the immediate surge of urgency. His hand moved to the communications officer, barking commands, voice carrying a brittle edge. Eyes wide with the brief flare of panic. Every micro-expression, the flick of an eyelid, the clenching of jaw muscles, the tightening of his nostrils spoke of a man straining to maintain authority as control slipped through his fingers. Patricia Quinn remained stationary, her eyes scanning the satellite thermal imaging with deliberate scrutiny. Blue and red thermal blooms pulsed across her screens, mapping enemy firing positions and the pinned SEAL elements in stark contrast. She flexed her fingers over the console, the joints stiff from hours of sustained focus, breathing slow and measured. The patterns confirmed her analysis. The enemy had established overlapping enfilade fields along the valley, fortified positions designed explicitly to shred any frontal approach. Every trajectory, every angle, and every heat signature was meticulously catalogued in her mind as she ran the calculations for potential QRF insertion. Blackwood barked again, voice rising, gesturing vaguely toward the monitors. His posture was rigid, chest heaving imperceptibly, shoulders twitching as adrenaline coursed through his system. "Quick reaction force, deploy immediately!" The words were punctuated by rapid hand movements, almost too quick for the eye to track. "Execute a direct frontal assault. Break the encirclement." Patricia's gaze did not waver. She leaned slightly toward the console, tracking the advancing blue dots of the QRF on her terminal. Her lips pressed into a thin line, jaw contracting almost imperceptibly as she flexed her fingers against the keyboard. "Captain," she spoke, voice cold, precise, and clipped, cutting through the chaos. "A frontal push will walk the QRF directly into a crossfire. Look at the thermal blooms. You need to route them through the northern ridgeline." Blackwood's face flushed, a deep red microticks flickering along his left temple. His nostrils flared as he turned toward her, eyes wide and sharp with the sudden spike of defensive authority. "Shut your mouth, Quinn!" he roared, teeth clenched, voice booming across the operations center. "I am in command here. QRF, execute insertion immediately." Patricia's pulse remained steady, subtle, the only movement a slight rise and fall of her shoulders. She watched the blue dots accelerate toward the drop zone, each step along the planned insertion path feeding into the lethal geometry of the enemy's fire. Red thermal signatures clustered like predatory eyes waiting for the incursion. She flexed her hand, a faint click of the console keys echoing in rhythm with her calculated assessment. Every potential casualty, every vulnerable point was accounted for. She could see the precise moment the frontal assault would intersect with the overlapping fields of fire, and the methodical trap Blackwood had inadvertently walked them into. The hum of servers and the faint mechanical whine of the operations centers. Air system contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding over the valley. Patricia's eyes did not leave the screens. Her lips tightened, shoulders square, and jaw muscles flexed subtly, the quiet embodiment of controlled focus. Every heat bloom, every movement of the QRF, every fragment of fragmented telemetry streamed into her mind in an exacting matrix, preparing her for the intervention she knew was necessary. The room around her, operators, blinking monitors. The faint scent of spilled coffee existed only peripherally, their actions irrelevant to the unfolding precision she was orchestrating mentally. The moment the QRF boots impacted the uneven terrain, the enemy triggered the second phase of the ambush. Mortar shells pounded the ridgelines, creating rhythmic bursts of heat signatures that danced across Patricia Quinn's monitors. Radio chatter fragmented into chaotic, overlapping transmission shouts, suppressed curses, and the crackle of rounds impacting the soil and rocks. The QRF was pinned immediately alongside the original recon element, a gridlocked tableau of blue thermal dots and red lethal blooms. Blackwood froze mid-step, one hand hovering above the comms console, lips parted as if to speak, but no sound emerged. His jaw flexed repeatedly, subtle tremors running along the line of his neck. For a fleeting moment, the confident facade of command collapsed entirely. His eyes darted between the displays, tracking the heat signatures, then landing on the operators whose faces mirrored only quiet observation. The seals on the ground transmitted urgent requests, suppressive fire coordinates, exfil routes, status updates. His mouth moved slightly, forming words he did not release. Patricia's eyes tracked every micro-movement across the holographic grid. She observed the spatial relationships, the angles of approach, the gaps in enemy fields of fire. Every detail she had been cataloging for weeks crystallized into real-time decision-making. Her hands hovered over the console, fingertips flexing in minute controlled motions. Her shoulders remained square, jaw muscles flexing as she considered trajectory vectors and timing intervals. The operators around her were inert, their peripheral glances confirming the chain of command had dissolved into a ghost of its intended authority. With precise, deliberate movements, Patricia reached beneath her console and connected her headset directly to the master communications array. The tactile click of the hardwire engaged, severing Blackwood's microphone feed completely. She did not hesitate. She pulled up her shadow dossier, the intricate lattice of enemy operational psychology, automated targeting loops, and kinetic probability matrices she had meticulously compiled. Her lips pressed into a tight line as she keyed the comm, the microphone transmitting directly into the tactical net. "Bravo 2, this is Overwatch," she said, voice even, calibrated, and devoid of inflection that could betray stress. "Adjust your heading to 040. You have a 30-second blind spot in their mortar rotation. Move now." The SEALs on the ground did not question the voice. Blue dots surged forward across her displays, moving precisely through the corridor she had predicted, exploiting the microgaps in the enemy's firing cycle. Smoke from previous mortar impacts swirled around them, and the SEALs flowed through it, synchronizing with the rhythm of her commands. Red thermal signatures paused intermittently as the enemy recalibrated, creating the brief window she had identified. One by one, the units breached the first layer of the kill zone, exactly as her calculations had forecasted. Blackwood's realization was instantaneous. His headset was dead. His hands moved in a flailing attempt to regain connection, the slight tremor of his fingers betraying his panic. His face twisted, micro-ticks along his temple, pulsing, teeth clenched, eyes wide as he lunged toward Patricia's console. The muscles in his forearm tightened visibly as he reached for the cables, desperation sharp in every micro-motion. He had no frame of reference for what was unfolding. The control had silently shifted, and he could only react physically to the authority he no longer held. Patricia remained motionless, eyes locked on the advancing blue dots, jaw flexing ever so slightly, shoulders squared, fingers hovering above the console. Every calculation, every vector, every enemy reaction had been anticipated. Her presence was calm, precise, and resolutely unyielding, a quiet fulcrum around which the chaos on the ridge rotated. Before Blackwood could reach the console, the Master Chief's silhouette filled his peripheral vision. The tall, rigid frame moved with deliberate slowness, the soles of polished combat boots barely making a sound on the operations floor. Blackwood froze mid-lunge, fingers curling over empty air, eyes narrowing as the Chief's gaze met his. The stare was cold, unblinking, and absolute. Micro-tremors ran along Blackwood's jawline, nostrils flaring, a faint tick flickering in his left eyelid. He stepped back, a subtle but complete relinquishment of authority, his chest rising and falling in shallow, controlled breaths that contrasted sharply with the chaos still streaming across the screens. Patricia did not shift her position. Her eyes tracked the QRF and recon elements on the satellite thermal feeds with clinical precision. The enemy had committed fully to their kill zone, their enfilade lines rigid and predictable. She exploited each vector, each pattern, manipulating the engagement without ever drawing attention to herself. Her lips parted slightly, articulating commands with exacting cadence over the comms network. Fingers flexed against the console keys, knuckles blanching as she made micro-adjustments, redirecting units through gaps invisible to conventional observers. "Sniper on the eastern ridge," she spoke, voice low and even, carrying the authority of absolute certainty. Her eyes flicked to a faint thermal shift, a shadow against the ridgeline that would provide overwatch. "Wait for the dust cloud from the next mortar impact. 3, 2, 1. Cross the gap." Her breath remained steady, shoulders squared, every micro-movement controlled, precise. One by one, the pinned operators surged through the valley. The blue thermal dots moved in deliberate increments, synchronized to the fractional pauses she had calculated in the enemy's firing sequence. Smoke plumes provided temporary concealment, and each SEAL exploited the exact blind spots she had identified. Red signatures flared in futile response. The enemy's shots cut into empty air, fragments of sand and foliage disturbed by rounds that did not find a target. Patricia's head barely shifted as she scanned the overlay of tactical grids, mapping trajectories and ensuring wounded personnel maintained secure fields of cover. Every instruction was delivered surgically, angle, timing, and cadence calculated to the precise second. Her jaw flexed almost imperceptibly as the last of the pinned operators breached the final kill zone, moving toward the extraction coordinates she had established. The extraction helicopters appeared on the western horizon, rotors slicing the early morning air. Each lift was synchronized to her commands. The SEALs boarded with exact timing, weapons slung in controlled positions. The valley emptied systematically, the operation executed as if by invisible hands orchestrating every movement. Blackwood remained at the console, eyes wide, mouth slack, utterly disconnected from the command unfolding before him. Patricia ran a final sweep across the enemy's localized network, tracing digital footprints and telemetry loops. A massive data packet transferred from the ambush site to a dark offshore server, the indicator flashing briefly on her console. Her pupils narrowed, a flicker of unease crossing the otherwise composed expression of her face. Fingers hovered over the keys, flexing subtly, jaw muscles tightening almost imperceptibly. The realization hit in a precise, clinical moment of clarity. The ambush had been a diversion, and a larger, more calculated operation was already in motion. The ops room remained silent, filled only with the soft hum of servers. The SEALs had survived because they had followed Patricia Quinn. Blackwood's authority, once absolute, had evaporated entirely, leaving the quiet professional to execute with methodical, invisible control. The extraction helicopters settled onto the tarmac with muted rotor thumps, sending up faint spirals of dust that caught in the harsh morning light. CALs descended one by one, boots hitting the concrete with precise cadence, gear heavy and scratched from the valley engagement. Each step carried the weight of exertion, muscles flexing with subtle tremors, sweat tracing thin lines down faces and necks. Their eyes did not seek Blackwood. The captain stood rigid by the hangar doors, posture stiff, mouth set, a slight twitch along his right temple betraying irritation beneath the facade of authority. Instead, the returning operator's gazes found Patricia Quinn. Her stance near the hangar doors was controlled, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the returning teams without flinch. When the first SEAL's glance met hers, there was a quiet nod, subtle, deliberate, a gesture loaded with acknowledgement of her tactical command and unspoken gratitude. The other operators followed suit, a line of silent respect forming between the field and the analyst who had orchestrated their extraction with surgical precision. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line as she shifted her attention to the datapad in her hands. The intercepted packet from the Valley ambush decrypted in a steady stream, line by line, encoding the enemy's next strategic move. Her brow creased imperceptibly, eyes narrowing at the cascading data. Each node, each time stamp confirmed her suspicion. The ambush had been a deliberate distraction. The enemy had sacrificed personnel to draw the QRF into engagement, draining defensive readiness and luring attention away from a far more critical target. The real strike was imminent. The primary coastal defense array safeguarding Taiwan's main naval port faced a multi-tiered kinetic assault, coordinated, simultaneous, and high yield. The implications were immediate. If the perimeter was misaligned, cascading system failures could occur, taking the regional defense grid offline in seconds. Her hand flexed slightly over the datapad, fingers brushing the surface with micro-adjustments, knuckles blanching. A sharp exhale betrayed the mental calculations being run at near-instant speed. She moved into the tactical planning room without hesitation. Blackwood was mid-command, voice clipped, arms gesturing to officers in a rigid display of regained authority. His lips moved rapidly, issuing orders to form a static defensive ring around the base's main gate. Micro-ticks flickered along his jaw and temple, betraying the underlying strain as he sought to assert dominance over the remaining personnel. Patricia studied his deployment overlay, eyes scanning the concentric formations of armored emplacements, artillery nodes, and infantry positions. The front gate was saturated with firepower, units stacked too deep, fields of fire overlapping as if to create an impenetrable wall. But her eyes immediately found the vulnerability. The subterranean fiber-optic junctions at the rear of the compound remained unshielded. Any successful strike there would cripple communications and defense coordination instantly. Her lips parted slightly, jaw tightening as her mind mapped the potential consequences. "You're leaving the rear flank completely exposed," she said, voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper, controlled and deliberate. Each word landed like a scalpel, precise and unyielding. "They want you to stack the front. It's a feint." Her gaze did not waver, tracking Blackwood's micro-expressions, the twitching of his nostrils, the shallow flick of his eyelids, the subtle rise of his shoulders as he processed her interjection. Blackwood's hand rose sharply, finger pointing, shaking almost imperceptibly, mere inches from her chest. His voice cracked as he issued a threat, tone tight with effort to maintain authority. "I will court-martial you for insubordination if you speak again. Perimeter defense holds the front gate. That is a final order." Micro-movements along his jawline and the flare of veins in his temple betrayed the volatility beneath the command. A man aware that control was slipping, but unwilling to cede it. Patricia remained still, eyes locked on his, posture unyielding. Her fingers flexed slightly at her sides, jaw muscles barely twitching as she absorbed the order, already calculating the precise adjustments necessary to counter the unseen strike. Her breath was even, deliberate, the calm epicenter of a storm others could only perceive through the actions she would take next. Patricia's gaze lingered on the trembling finger pointing at her chest, noting the micro-vibrations along Blackwood's hand and the shallow rise and fall of his shoulders. His lips were parted slightly, jaw muscles taut, as though the act of speaking drained the tension he could not otherwise control. She measured every detail, every flicker of micro-expression, and held her own posture unyielding, a quiet, cold counterweight to his display of fragile authority. She did not speak. She did not flinch. Instead, she pivoted on the balls of her boots and exited the briefing room, her movements deliberate, precise, and unhurried. Twice her analysis had been dismissed. Twice she had acted in the shadows to preserve lives. Each instance left a faint trace of exertion on her face-tightened jaw. Minute twitch in her eyelid, fingers curling slightly around the edge of the datapad, but her composure remained near absolute. She did not attempt to explain, did not raise her voice. She had learned that persuasion against an ego like Blackwood's was futile. Instead, she chose an approach that relied entirely on predictability, leveraging the patterns of thought and procedural rigidity she had observed for weeks. At a secondary terminal, Patricia accessed the base's automated defense mainframe. Her fingers moved with deliberate cadence across the keyboard, flexing and releasing with a subtle rhythm that mirrored her internal timing of enemy movement. The defensive perimeter displayed on the system remained static and fully aligned with Blackwood's overlay, its flaws glaring but entirely visible to any external observer. On the compromised enemy's surveillance feeds, this presented an unambiguous target: the front gate, heavily stacked and rigidly defended. She allowed the digital projection to remain, knowing it would reinforce the enemy commander's expectations of a conventional, predictable defense. Beneath that facade, she began precise surgical recalibration. Each CIWS platform's targeting sensors was manually reoriented. Small but critical adjustments angling coverage toward the rear junctions she had identified as vulnerable. Her eyes scanned thermal overlays, targeting grids, and fire arcs with mathematical rigor, lips pressing into a tight line as she calculated trajectories in real time. Her breath remained even, shoulders squared, every muscle coordinated to maintain precision. Simultaneously, her fingers tapped rapid, encrypted messages to the SEAL squad leaders she had just extracted. Grid coordinates appeared on their personal devices, contradicting Blackwood's orders but optimizing concealment and fields of fire. The operators did not pause. They executed the instructions with seamless discipline, moving into shadowed positions along the rear junctions. Dust and foliage shifted lightly under boots, the sound muted, the movement choreographed with absolute timing. Outside, the sky darkened as cloud cover merged with the smoke from distant flares. The sun obscured in the early afternoon light. Base sirens began their wailing, mechanical shrills slicing through the hum of servers and distant rotor wash. The enemy's strike package approached, fast attack vehicles and elite infantry moving in disciplined formation. They crossed the coastal perimeter, bypassing the fortified front gate with confident assumptions that the defenses were stacked as predicted. Their approach triggered no alarms at the sensors aligned with Blackwood's display. They were drawn like moths to the apparent weakness, precisely as she had calculated. Patricia's eyes narrowed, tracking every unit, every shadow, every anomaly on her screens. She allowed herself only the smallest micro-movement of her jaw, flexing her fingers slightly in anticipation, adjusting the sensors in real time. Each action, invisible to the enemy, set the stage for the disruption she had meticulously planned. The operators in the rear junctions remained motionless in the dark, poised to strike at the optimal instant. Their breathing synchronized with the pulse of the sensors and the timing of incoming vehicles. Patricia's mind ran a continuous loop of contingencies, her hands flexing imperceptibly, ready to adapt to any variance in the enemy's advance. The silent war she orchestrated had begun. The enemy column advanced with disciplined cadence, boots striking in unison against the compacted earth of the rear approach. Each squad maintained spacing and formation, rifles slung, optics scanning the perimeter for signs of resistance. Their confidence was evident in the subtle lift of chins, the slight narrowing of eyes, and the crisp synchronization of their movements. They had assumed the American defensive posture was fixed, predictable, and flawed exactly as Patricia had anticipated. Patricia's eyes flicked over her multi-spectrum displays. Thermal overlays, motion vectors, and real-time sensor readouts merged into a single operational picture. She identified the precise moment when the lead elements would cross the kill box she had meticulously defined. Her hand hovered over the command console for a fraction of a second. Muscles coiled like springs before she executed the trigger sequence. The base's electronic warfare modules flared simultaneously, emitting concentrated impulses that immediately incapacitated the enemy's night vision devices. A low hum escalated into a piercing whine as optics failed. Thermal scopes blacked out, and communication headsets filled with static. Micro-expressions flashed across the faces of the enemy leaders visible through the hacked UAV feed. Pupils dilated. Jaws tightened, lips parted slightly in disbelief, hands twitching toward malfunctioning radios. At the same instant, the automated CIWS platforms she had manually re-angled roared to life. The first rounds of depleted uranium slammed into the lead vehicles, tearing through light armor with precision. Shards of metal and smoke erupted in the confined space of the rear perimeter. The enemy attempted to adjust formation, but the crossfire Patricia had layered was surgical, overlapping arcs, calculated timing, and integrated with the natural cover of terrain and shadows. Infantry elements scrambled to avoid the fire, dropping into shallow foxholes and behind debris, their movements erratic under sudden disorientation. The trenches near the exposed fiber optic junctions became a death trap, precisely where she had positioned the SEAL fire teams. Operators moved fluidly from shadow to shadow, rifles sweeping lanes of fire with pinpoint accuracy. Every round was deliberate, measured, and synchronized with the CIWS engagement. Patricia's eyes flicked to each thermal bloom, observing micro-adjustments in enemy posture and weapon alignment. Small movements, a tilt of the head, a flick of a wrist, a tightening of the shoulder strap, each data point fed into her continuous recalibration of targeting grids. Her jaw was set, a subtle tightening of the right eyelid betraying the intense focus, while her shoulders remained squared, almost motionless, despite the rhythmic tension in her forearms. Half a mile away at the front gate, Blackwood remained stationary behind a barricade, fingers tightening around the rifle grip until knuckles whitened. His eyes darted over the darkened landscape, scanning for any action he could influence. None came. Not a single shot passed his line of sight. The unfolding battle-complete destruction of the enemy column, containment of casualties, securing of the rear junctions, was entirely orchestrated from Patricia's console. His posture, once commanding, now mirrored a subtle collapse, shoulders slumping fractionally, lips pressed tight, and the shallow rise and fall of his chest betraying a controlled, failing breath pattern. As the final insurgents in the kill box were neutralized, silence returned to the rear perimeter. No movements, no transmissions. Only the lingering smoke of the CIWS rounds and faint thermal signatures of the extracted seals. Patricia's hands rested lightly on the console, fingers flexing slightly to maintain contact, scanning for residual anomalies. She allowed herself the smallest exhale, nearly imperceptible, as the operational picture confirmed total Allied control. The heavy blast doors of the command center creaked, releasing tension built over the previous hours. 2 military police officers entered, their polished black boots clicking in measured cadence against the concrete floor, flanking the austere figure of the Pacific Fleet commander. Every detail, the crisp folds of the uniform, the micro-adjustments of the commander's posture, the slight narrowing of his eyes, spoke to the arrival of authority and the formal recognition of a victory. Orchestrated by the analyst who had remained unseen for months. The debriefing room was an austere chamber of polished steel and matte finish holographic panels. Every surface reflected the weight of command. Admiral Vance stood rigid at the head of the table, eyes scanning the holographic display of the engagement with surgical precision. Thermal traces, electronic warfare signatures, drone telemetry, and troop movements pulsed in synchronized layers across the table. Each data point tracked with millisecond accuracy, showing the rhythm of a battle executed with meticulous timing. Blackwood remained at rigid attention, uniform flawless despite the chaos of the past hours. Beads of sweat clung to his hairline, trickling imperceptibly down the sides of his face. His jaw tightened. The faint tick in his left eye betrayed a rapid staccato awareness of his impending professional collapse. He opened his mouth, fingers flexing lightly at his sides, ready to claim credit for actions he had not directed. "Sir, my defensive posture was designed to..." His voice wavered on the first syllable, the carefully rehearsed narrative cracking under the weight of objective evidence. "Silence, Captain." Vance's reply snapped across the room. The words struck like a steel rod, precise and undeniable. His eyes narrowed, scanning the data feed, tracing lines of engagement, calculating lethal vectors. He tapped the console with deliberate rhythm, activating overlays that highlighted every operational decision during the drone strike, the valley ambush, and the rear flank engagement. Every maneuver that saved lives bore the unmistakable digital signature of Patricia Quinn. Each override of electronic systems, each tactical adjustment, and every precise exfiltration route was encrypted with her methodology, her timing, her foresight. Blackwood's inputs were highlighted in red, a glaring mosaic of error. Misaligned fire teams, delayed QRF deployment, and static defensive clustering jumped from the display, each failure marked in sharp contrast to Patricia's surgical efficiency. His lips pressed tight, a barely perceptible tremor running through his lower jaw. The shallow, uneven rise and fall of his chest betrayed the sudden constriction in his diaphragm. The arrogance that had governed his decisions, the carefully constructed facade of authority, began to collapse in microseconds of realization. "Captain Blackwood, you are relieved of command, effective immediately," the admiral stated. His tone left no room for interpretation. Military police, black-gloved and precise, moved in synchronized steps to escort the captain from the room. Blackwood's shoulders slumped incrementally as he exhaled, a low, measured release of the authority he had clung to. His eyes flicked briefly toward Patricia, an unspoken recognition of the intellect that had outmaneuvered him at every point, and then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him with finality. All attention shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, toward Patricia. The admiral, maintaining his rigid posture, gave no verbal commendation. Instead, he executed a precise, crisp salute. His expression was unreadable, but the weight of acknowledgement carried a depth that words could not convey. Patricia returned it with equal formality, shoulders squared, jaw set, eyes calm yet burning with the quiet intensity of the operator who had endured humiliation, silenced authority and invisibility, and transformed it into unassailable control. She stood alone in the aftermath, the debriefing room silent except for the soft hum of the holographic servers. No applause, no praise, only the resolute acknowledgement of competence and the indelible mark of operational mastery. Every operator, every officer present understood without words. Patricia Quinn had not only preserved lives, but had executed the orchestration of an entire theater of conflict with precision that defied conventional command structures. Her presence alone had rewritten the metrics of effectiveness and tactical genius in real time. The door sealed behind the last officers, and the quiet weight of authority settled fully on her shoulders. She remained standing, a figure of controlled poise, absorbing the magnitude of her accomplishment in complete silence. Her eyes traced the data feeds one last time, confirming every variable, every alignment, every life secured. A faint exhale, the only outward sign of release, escaped her, and she allowed herself a micro-smile of quiet satisfaction. The battlefield had finally recognized her strategy, intellect, and resilience. For those who followed the path of calculated precision and invisible authority, her actions were a masterclass in quiet professional excellence. If you appreciate stories of tactical genius and disciplined execution, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analyses and narratives of operational mastery.